Hello and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Overcoming Payment Declines, Recoup Revenue, and Boost Conversions. We are going to give people a minute or two to settle, and I will start the presentation momentarily, so please stay on the line. Thank you all for joining us today. We're going to start the presentation in just a moment. I'm going to give folks a minute or two to settle down and get plugged in, and we will start momentarily. Thanks for joining us. Just a few more seconds, let people settle down, and we'll start the presentation. Please stay on the line. Hello, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Our presentation today is Overcoming Payment Declines, Recoup Revenue, and Boost Conversions. My name is DJ Murphy. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Card Not Present. I'm really excited for today's event. I talk to merchants all the time about payment acceptance, and one of the biggest points of frustration that I've seen, especially, and one that especially seems to be growing lately, is that of issuer declines. I think the source of that frustration is that merchants are often in the dark about why these transactions are being declined. So, you know, a lot of frustration is built because there's not a lot of transparency on the issuer side, and you know, folks really need to know about that. Today we have Alon Shem-Tov and Ephraim Rinsky, both are from Riskified. They're going to take you through some very interesting numbers highlighting what transactions are being declined by banks and why. They'll also talk about various ways you can recoup some of the revenue that you are losing to issuer declines, a really important topic for you. Before I turn it over to them, I just have a couple of housekeeping things. Effie and Alon are taking questions today, so if you have a question at any time, you can enter it into the questions tab in your webinar dashboard. So please just let that, you know, remember that. We have several polls today. I want to kind of get a feel for how the audience that we have on board today feels about a couple of different issues. So look for those and participate in those, and they'll be able to talk a little bit more about specifically what's concerning people in this audience. Also, there will be a recording of this event, so if for some reason you are unable to stay for the whole thing, or if you missed some of it and want to see some of what they said again, that will be available on cardnotpresent.com shortly after the event. We will email folks who registered so that they know the recording is available. So I'm going to turn it over to Effie and Alon. Thank you, gentlemen, both for being here, and take it away.
Thanks so much, DJ. So I'm Effie. I'm working marketing here at Riskified, and I'm sitting here with Alon, who's a senior product marketer, product manager. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about overcoming payment declines, how to recoup some revenue from these and boost your conversion rate. So the agenda for today, we're going to explain what payment declines are and why it's a topic that merchants really should care about. We'll talk a little bit about the extent of the payment declines issue across the e-commerce world. And we'll dig in based on our research and explain a little bit about which customers and retailers are most at risk of being incorrectly payment declined. And then Alon will talk a little bit about Deco, which is Riskified's new product, which is a solution to payment declines. Just a little bit about Riskified, who we are, and why we're in a good position to talk to you guys about this. We're an end-to-end e-commerce solution that's designed to boost revenue and protect brand reputation. We offer a full suite of products to drive approval rates and prevent fraud throughout the shopping journey. Here are just some of our clients. We work with some of the fastest growing companies in the world and help them reduce risk, grow their e-commerce revenue, and provide their customers with a better shopping experience. With billions of transactions transactions under our belt, we feel we have a very good understanding of the payment system, particularly of the inefficiencies. As you can see, we represent merchants really across a lot of different verticals and geographies, so we feel we have a really broad picture of the landscape. Okay, so let's start off by explaining what a payment decline is. So Alone, I'm not sure about you, but before I started working at Riskified, I kind of assumed that credit card transactions were more or less like cash transactions. That is, you gave the merchant the money and you got your good in return. It's just that it all happened in a digital sphere. But in fact, it turns out that the truth is much more complicated. When a shopper pays with a card, the transaction has to pass through a bunch of financial entities, sort of middlemen, for approval in order to succeed. So this graphic is a little bit of an oversimplification because the precise flow of payments can vary a little bit between merchants, but in any case, a payment must be approved by at least these three institutions in order to eventually clear. And the order can end up being declined at any of these stages. And if it is, then the merchant will never even get a chance to review the order themselves. So let's take our first polling question. We're curious sort of where you guys stand on this issue. How concerned are you about payment declines?
All right, you can select any answer you want. We'll take a second or two to see how people are looking. All right, everybody's at least a little concerned. There's nobody who has picked any other. I'll close that right now, and you can see how people voted. There we go.
Okay.
Here's your results.
Okay, so looks like we're split between very concerned and a little concerned. Good. You should be concerned because payment declines are a big problem. That's why we're talking about them today. If you think about it, this is a situation where the customer wants to make a purchase, the merchant wants to sell them the good. They both want this transaction to happen, but they're not. It's not allowed to happen because of these financial intermediaries. And the merchant never even gets a chance to review the order and make a decision themselves. Alone, can you talk a little bit about how much transparency we have into the authorization process? Can we look at a payment decline and understand why, for instance, the card issuer decided to decline it?
Yes, of course, Effie. So the truth is, we can't see inside of that black box. We can't say this is why an order was declined. It's not. It just doesn't work like that. We put here on the screen three common payment decline reasons that come up a lot when you look into your gateway to see why a payment was declined. The payment gateway is where you'll find the information about your payment declines. And usually, these are the sorts of vague reasons the bank provide for why an order was declined. As you can see, usually there aren't much of a help. As a matter of fact, the payment decline reasons are vague on purpose. The main reason for that is to protect the privacy of the customer whose order was declined. So even though this is with goodwill and it does protect, the bank is justifiably want to protect their end users, their consumers, but for the merchant, this can be a problem and an issue, right? Because the effect on this is that the merchant has very little visibility, even at all, into the process that's declining their orders.
Okay.
Alone,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt here, Alone. It looks like the poll is stuck. Folks are just seeing the poll. If you could sort of maybe close your presentation down, open it back up. It looks like what we're seeing is just the poll. It seems to be stuck on that.
Okay. Gotcha.
No, and maybe I can. All right, try again now. There we go. Okay, now yep, now we can bring it back up and we should be fine.
Great. So yeah, Alon was saying that here we have some examples of the kind of decline reasons that you might see in your payment gateway, and they're not very helpful. These things like invalid transaction or transaction not allowed don't tell you a lot about why the bank made their decision. So it's really hard to get a look inside of that black box of the bank's algorithms. So what we did at Riskified, because we can't see exactly inside that black box, is we tried to reverse engineer the bank's models based on their outputs. So we analyzed a few million payment declines, and this is what we found. So the authorization system is pretty inaccurate, and our research uncovered that these three types of orders in particular tend to be incorrectly declined quite frequently. So high ticket orders, it is true that these are more likely to be fraud, but banks are way too risk averse when it comes to these. We saw a lot of good high ticket orders being payment declined. Orders with an international element, that can mean that the card was issued by a country that's different than the store or the acquiring bank. And when these parties aren't familiar with each other, there's a relatively high chance that one of them will choose to decline the transaction. And then there are transactions that just look a little bit different than usual. This is often due to the evolving nature of e-commerce. So people who work in e-commerce know that's really not that weird for instance, a customer to make a purchase while they're traveling and request to pick the order up in store in their hometown once they come back. But that might look risky to the bank. It's also not that unusual for a consumer to place a bunch of orders in succession, but that's quite likely to trigger a velocity rule for the bank because that looks worrisome. It's just that the fact is that most of these review systems for the bank were built in the 90s or even earlier, and e-commerce has changed a lot since then. So in fact, we found that up to 70% of payment declines are recoverable. When we started doing this research, we knew that the system was inefficient, but this surprised us. That 7 out of 10 payment declines were from good customers who could afford to make the purchase. And as we'll discuss later, Riskified is unrolling a solution to convert those customers and recoup these orders. We have another polling question now.
All right, we'll see if this one goes. So choose your answer. All right, we'll give it a few more seconds.
Okay, so looks like over half said 10 to 20%. Sorry, DJ, can you take us off there and put us back on again?
Yep, there we go. All right, hold on. It's happening again. Okay, try that back up again. Sorry about that.
Okay, so it looked like over 50% said C, 10 to 20%, and that's pretty consistent with our research. We found that across industries, on average, about 10% of e-commerce orders by dollar amount are payment declined. And we estimate that $340 billion in orders will be payment declined in 2019. If you've listened to any Riskified webinars before, we talk a lot about the issue of false declines at checkout. Merchants turning away good orders due to fear of fraud. That's definitely a huge problem, but as you can see here, payment declines are nearly double that volume. So why are payment declines a problem? So yeah, obviously there's the lost revenue, especially when, as we mentioned, up to 70% of these payment declines are happening to good customers. And that's exacerbated by the fact that we conducted a formal survey of 5,000 consumers and found that over half the time, the customer simply abandons their cart after one payment decline, usually going to the competitor. So there's the lost revenue, and then furthermore, even though it's obviously unjustified, the customer is likely to blame the merchant for being declined. Again, this is not really fair, but alone, I mean, what do payment declines look like to customers? What are they seeing?
Okay, so usually after being payment declined, consumers often see just an error message that looks something like this, as we can see on the screen, saying there was an error processing the payment or that their order couldn't be processed. Often it's not even a pop-up, right? It's just a small message that shows somewhere on the screen. But basically, no matter how it's presented, the consumer doesn't have anywhere to turn or any idea what to do next. So in most cases, what they'll do is just leave. Most consumers don't understand the authorization process. We don't expect them to understand the authorization process. It's invisible for them anyway. As long as they care, it's between them and the merchant. That's the only party they've interacted with. So naturally, they will assume that there could be some kind of technical issue with the merchant, or just that the merchant made the decision for any reason to decline their payment.
Okay, so just to make this idea a little bit less abstract, here's an anonymous case study of a merchant that we work with. They're a major North American apparel retailer, and we kind of dug into their numbers. We found out that 15% of their sort of domestic orders, that's North American, were getting payment declined, and 32% from their European stores. Remember that banks are particularly risk averse when it comes to those international orders. So these aren't all loss. Obviously, some payment declines are correct. They should be declined. But in this case, this came out to about $20 million from us conducting a post-mortem on these orders, about $20 million in payment declines that could have been converted in 2018. So $20 million left on the table. In our research, we also found certain industries are particularly susceptible to payment declines. So orders for gift cards are particularly likely to be incorrectly payment declined. Just you can think of it sort of like fraud review at checkout. There are fewer data points for these orders, right? Because they're digital. So, for instance, there's no shipping address, and that clearly makes the banks more risk averse with these. A lot of sneaker retailers we work with have payment decline rates exceeding 20%. Part of the reason is there actually is a lot of fraud in these orders, but these decline rates are excessive. In luxury fashion, again, these are big ticket orders, which kind of scares the banks. And there's also a lot of international shopping. We have luxury fashion merchants who have payment decline rates exceeding 30%. And then there's OTAs. These kind of are the perfect storm. They're big ticket digital items. They can be international, have international data points and unusual shopping patterns. Like travelers might buy these while they're on the go. And these we see regularly payment decline rates between 20 and 30% for OTAs. Of course, any kind of end user can experience a payment decline, but we found that there are certain personas who are most vulnerable. One is what we like to call life event shoppers. Think of somebody who just got married or just had a kid. They're doing a lot of shopping, probably for types of goods that they don't usually shop for. You're suddenly buying furniture for your new house, or you're buying baby stuff, and you have a very high spending velocity. And these sort of customers often get incorrectly payment declined. Travelers, as we discussed earlier, they can have mismatches in their orders, like billing address not matching the shipping address if they're ordering something to their hotel, let's say, while they're traveling. As we've discussed in previous webinars, you shouldn't rely too much on data points like that when you're reviewing orders for fraud, but banks do seem to decline orders often based on this mismatch. And then teens and 20-somethings, banks don't have a lot of historical information on them, right? They probably just got cards, and they also have low credit limits, so they're quite likely to be payment declined. So as I mentioned, Riskified is now enrolling a solution to payment declines, and I'm sitting here with Alon, who is the product manager of this product. It's called Deco. Alon, can you tell us a little bit about how the product works?
Yes, of course, Effie. So after we understood the magnitude of the problem we just went through, we tried to figure out what is a way that we can come up with to use the technology we already built to detect checkout of fraud to help merchants recover revenue from payment declines. So what we do with Deco is take the good orders, like the orders that we think are good, although they were rejected during the authorization process, and let them check out in a different way. How does it actually look? Okay, from the merchant perspective, this is the flow. Consider a payment decline happening. In real time, the merchant will get an analysis response from us if we think this order is good for Deco, even though it was declined by the bank. If we gave the thumbs up that this is a good order, the merchant will pop up a pop-up of Deco with all the information for the consumer that he needs to know about the Deco service. If the consumer chooses to opt in, he completes his checkout with Deco. At that point in time, as long as the merchant cares, he can fulfill the order. Okay, there's no risk on his side. They simply have to fulfill the order, and Deco will pay on behalf of the consumer. All the risk of collection is solely on Deco's responsibility. How does it look from the end user side, from the consumer side? Imagine a payment decline. At the moment of the payment decline, it will show a pop-up. As we said, this is a pop-up that we usually work with our merchants to have it best tailored and compatible with their user experience and brand. And once the user opts in, he clicks Pay with Deco. He just accepts the terms of service, clicks Pay with Deco. He will be redirected to the order confirmation page of the merchant, and that's it. The payment is done. And I'll say it once again. The merchant is paid regardless of what happens after this. Collection from the consumer is solely Deco responsibility.
Thanks, Alon. So that actually is the end of our presentation. And DJ, we'd love to open it up for questions now.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take a couple of questions now. And the first one is, you mentioned early on in the presentation that you found out that there had a 70% of the declines were good customers. The first question that came in was, how did you find that out? How did you find out that 70% number?
Okay, so we drew on a few things. One is our experience reviewing orders for checkout fraud. So by looking at these in post-mortem, it helped us find the orders that are safe, even though the bank decided otherwise. We ran millions of orders through our sort of tweaked machine learning models to check them for fraud and reliability. Another asset was our database of orders. for many customers, we have a lot of transaction history. So if they're declined for a $100 pair of sneakers, but we see that they've bought dozens of pairs like this in the past, we can be pretty sure there's just some technical card issue. All right, this is definitely a consumer who can afford to make the purchase. And finally, now we're testing it. With Deco, we're giving these payment decline customers the option to check out. Just they have 14 days to pay, and then they end up paying us. So these aren't fraudsters, and they really can't afford to make the purchase.
Okay, fantastic. Folks, if you do have questions, please ask them now. We'll take a few minutes longer to answer questions here online, but if you ask something that we don't get to, they'll get to you offline as well. The next question that came in was, how can I figure out what my company's payment decline rate is? So I guess they're asking, the specific companies have different perspectives, different processes, different systems. What can most people do?
Sure, DJ. I'll take that one. So usually, from the merchant perspective, the payment declines rates should be aggregated inside the payment gateway they're working with. Even if the issuing bank is the entity that is declining the payment, the merchant should be able to find the exact rates within their gateway. If you're having trouble understanding the information you're finding in your gateway, feel free to reach out to us. We have all the information and guides on how to find decline rates within specific gateways.
Okay, fantastic. Here we have one that came in that says, will Deco work with a custom-built cart?
I'm sorry?
It says, the question is, will Deco work with a custom-built cart, shopping cart, I assume?
A custom-filled cart?
Built.
I'm sorry, I don't understand, EJ. Can you say that one more time?
So will it work if an online store is custom built their shopping cart? It's built it specifically, so it's not a standard, an e-commerce platform that you might know. It's a custom built one. Will Deco work with it?
So if I understand correctly, the question is about even if the merchant doesn't work with an e-commerce platform, let's say Magento or Shopify or BigCommerce or something like that, Deco can still work. If I understand the question, this is what I understand from the question. So the answer is definitely yes. We're agnostic to the e-commerce platforms we work with, and Deco can work with most of the platforms out there. Even more so if you built the site yourself and you're not dependent on any platform.
Okay, all right. Someone has asked about approximate cost of the system. Is that something that you would get back to someone online, or is that something that you would want to talk about here?
We would prefer to take that on a private level.
Okay, and for the person who asked that, they'll be able to get back to you offline on that. Absolutely. Yeah. And finally, do you have to already be an existing customer of Riskified to use Deco?
No, you don't. Actually, we have some merchants who are already starting on Deco, and they don't use our Riskified flagship product yet.
Okay. All right. We're coming down to the bottom of the hour here. I really appreciate Effie and Alon taking the time. I appreciate all of the folks who stayed with us through the presentation. Declines are a huge issue. The CNP Expo, our show in San Francisco in May, will absolutely have a session or two on declines. You can get together with other merchants and talk about what they're finding on this issue as well. I want to thank Effie and Alon for providing us with all this really great information. And as I mentioned, the recording, if you missed any, will be online at Card Not Present fairly soon. We'll let everybody know about that. And other than that, I want to thank everybody for being here, and we will see you next time.
All right, thanks so much.